Megan. Yep. I haven't taught the captions how to spell my name, however. We'll give it another minute and then we'll get started. All right, we good to go? Yep. Welcome to my talk on inclusive presentation design, or designing presentations for a diverse human audience. A couple things to know before we get started. My name is Megan. I'm a consultant. I've worked in the data industry for about 15 years now. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, which is why I tend to speak at a lot of conferences. And I got interested in inclusive information design about 6 years ago now, and I started out in Power BI and then translated that into how does this work for PowerPoint and presentations in general. If you are a person that likes to take notes or have a takeaway from a session, there is one available for you. It's at that tinyurl.com/presentforhumans. It is a Word document, so you don't have to scribble anything down. Any link that I talk about should be in the document. Also, I appreciate any feedback you have, so the bottom URL is to give feedback on my session. Before I ask why we give presentations, I am also a human. I will make mistakes today. The goal is never to make our presentations perfect, as nice as that would be. It's to make them worthwhile to attend, to get our message across. There are all kinds of presentations. What you see a lot here, but not entirely, is to inform. When you see people out there in their booths, that's usually to persuade, but sometimes to inform. There are some sessions that are just to inspire. And there are some sessions that are just to entertain. We've had people do sessions at SQL conferences that were entirely a song, and it was just fun. And that is all okay. But we have to make sure that our audience, you all, remember what we wanted you to get out of it. Even if it's just you felt good and you met a new person after leaving. How many of you in this room have experienced a presentation at work or at a conference with tiny little font where no one could read? Raise your hand. That's most everybody. What about people that read directly from their slides? They sit here hunched over their laptop and they go, and my next point is, and they read exactly the words from the slide. How many have been involved in that? Yep, just about everybody again. A lot of us start that way. If you speak and you feel like you do that, we've probably all done that at some point. The session is not to shame you. It's to help share what I've learned so that we can get better. And one way to drastically improve how your presentation goes and to not feel so bad about little small issues here and there is to change your focus. Instead of designing your presentation and saying, what do I want to say? What if we said, what do I want my audience to learn or to take away? Most of my presentations are to inform people, so that's why I use the word learn, but loosely defined learn. This is all to make the point that absolutely the way that you present your content, you could know everything there is to know on the topic. You could be the most likable person. But that doesn't necessarily mean your presentation is a success. The way that we present our content affects our audience's ability to learn. The challenge is that we are human and we are all incredibly different. Every one of you sees just a little bit differently, or some people not at all. Every one of you hears just a little bit differently. A lot of us speak different native languages. A lot of us learn differently. We read differently. We remember information differently. There is no magic formula to make a presentation where everybody takes in all the information that I put out there perfectly. That's just not how human communication works. But that's not to say we shouldn't try. There are some things that are proven to help, and that's what we will go through today. And we'll start with our actual presentation design. So slides, handouts, that type of thing. The first thing is to structure your presentation with purpose. Before you even make a slide, think about the order in which you want to present things so that they make sense for somebody who's new to the topic. One of the biggest issues, especially in technical talks, is that I know the topic really well. I've been studying it for a long time. Is my audience supposed to know all that? Because I may order things a little differently or include a different slide for someone who's new to the topic versus someone who's been thinking about this and doing it for a while. I also may want to remove slides. I often make a presentation and then go back through and go, oh, this isn't necessary. This now feels like a tangent. I don't need to include this because it's actually going to cause more distraction from my takeaways, my main points, than it is going to help. That's not to say stories and tangents can't happen. I will probably have some today, but some of those may be organic. They will happen as I think of it. If I have one that I'm going to plan, does it help with my goals? Which means I have to have goals. What do I want you to know when you leave here in 50-ish, 45-ish minutes? Create content that goes towards those goals. I say the same thing when I do Power BI reports. If I'm building a dashboard and I can't tell you why I put a chart on the page, it might not be a good thing to have. Same thing with your presentations. That's not to mean it should be very dry and perfect and nothing, out of place, nothing decorative. The point is more, does this help achieve my goal? Sometimes entertainment helps achieve my goal. Sometimes colors and shapes help achieve my goal. But I want to always be working towards what I want people to get out of this more than just how do I want to design my slides or what do I want to say. And then, like I said earlier, I may rearrange content, I may remove content. Once I've got kind of the brain dump, the initial stuff out there, I may go, oh, you know what would make more sense? If I talk about, and I did this for this presentation, I moved things. We'll talk about handouts and your presentation environment, but I switched the order of those things because it made more sense, I think, to put handouts after this presentation design section instead of at the end. You can let me know what you think afterwards. And don't be afraid to cut content. We made it, but don't be precious about it. I will make probably hundreds of thousands of slides before, I finish presenting my last presentation. If I get really stuck on, but I spent an hour on this one slide, then I'm not willing to sacrifice it to better support what I want you to learn. So let's get into the actual design. These are guidelines. There will always be a reason to deviate from this. So take this as a suggestion. If you have a good, purposeful thing you'd like to do that goes against this, by all means, feel free to do it. This is just a general, this is how things can go, usually, to help you out, to make things more accessible and more consumable for any of your audience members. And the first thing is fonts are really important. I have a lot of text that you'll see over the next several minutes. I don't want to use lots and lots of different fonts. When we change fonts, our brains tend to interpret that as having some kind of meaning. What does it mean when I switch fonts? Am I emphasizing something? Am I pointing out kind of a tangent and a side over here? Or am I just stating bullet points of the same importance? We don't want to needlessly change fonts. People who have trouble reading for various reasons also may have trouble if you keep changing fonts because their brain is getting used to that font and they get used to reading it. We don't want to switch it on them needlessly. That's not to say you can only have one font always and forever. It is to say, change your fonts with purpose. In general, right now, studies show that sans serif, like what you see on my slides, is generally easier to read on slides. There is different research as far as people reading long web pages or newspapers versus what we call glanceable reading, which is what's up here. Glanceable reading means you're probably not staring at my slides 100% of the time. You're gonna look up there and then maybe listen to me talk and maybe look down at your phone, that's fine. We want you to be able to glance up, get the information, and then go back to however you consume information. I had a person on Twitter tell me once that she takes knitting materials 2 sessions and she's not trying to be rude. She has to keep busy with her hands so that she can actually focus on the thing in front of her. And if that's the way it works for you, that's great. I want to make my slides so that you can keep knitting and glance up and get what you need and then keep going. So sans serif fonts for slides are generally easier to read. What's also helpful when you're choosing a font, you want to choose a font where the L, the number 1, and the capital I all actually look different. This helps people not only with dyslexia and other reading disabilities, but also people who read in a native language that doesn't look like the English alphabet, so that things are just easier to distinguish. And people with low vision, lots of other things. Any reason why you would have a hard time distinguishing between I and L, we can fix this with a choice of a different font. We also want to look for fonts with wider strokes. That doesn't mean your letters are necessarily wide, but the lines that make up the letters are not super thin. So let's look at some examples. On the left, you'll see a sans serif font. That's Source Sans Pro, and that's what I use through most of this presentation. And on the right, we see a serif font. You might recognize this, Times New Roman. The difference is the little glyphs on the end of the letters, like the S and the F. Look at the bottom of the letters. When we're looking at slides right now, the recommendation is sans serif. You can have a plain font or a decorative font. Decorative fonts are generally more difficult to read. I would use those very sparingly. You may have a reason to do it, but it has to be a good reason. You can't just do it because it looks cool. Here's an example of where Arial has done a good job of differentiating the number 1 and the I, but the B and D look almost like mirror images of each other. Versus Callisto doesn't do a good job of 1 and L, but B and D are differentiated by the glyph at the bottom of the D. This may seem really small, and it's stuff a lot of people overlook, but when you're the one that struggles with that one thing, it makes such a big difference. So here's what I mean by wide strokes within the letter. You can have a thick font, look at that Calibri, or a very skinny font. So any font that says light at the end is basically the skinnier lines in the letter. We also want to pay attention to font size. This is one of the biggest things, and you will see me if you follow me on Twitter or go to my blog. I absolutely will call conferences out for this. BITS did not have a slide template, but they will give you a template that encourages you to have bullet points with like 12-point font. People cannot read that, especially if you're doing hybrid presentations where it's online and in person. We generally want to make our font really big. It needs to be at least 24-point. 32 would be even better, because no one wants to squint at your presentation the whole time. If I had to look at tiny font and squint at it, I would stop looking after a while because it's not comfortable. If you're not comfortable, you're not going to learn from me. So let's look at the differences. And we have a nice big screen in this room, so most of it will still look pretty big. But if you're sitting in the back, it may start looking a little blurry or a little harder to read. This room has pretty decent lighting. I've been in presentation rooms where The presentation was on. If y'all are in the room, there's a screen, I don't know, 60 something inches. And that was all I had to present on. I've been in rooms where there was bright light from outside shining on the screen. All of that makes a difference. So if I can use the bigger dark font on a light background, that's gonna help. So most of my slides will look like what you see towards the bottom, where I have point 1 is 24 point. That's kind of my minimum. And immediately, I adopted a new template at my job, so you will see lots of people from Denny Cherry and Associates using a template that looks kind of similar to this, because we actually paid a friend of mine who's in the industry for presentation design to help us design a template that works for us. And the very first pushback was, but then I can only fit a couple things on the slide. Yes, absolutely yes. You have too much stuff on your slide. I almost guarantee it. Until you start really trying to design like this, you probably have too much stuff. I thought I was pretty good and I still had way too much stuff. People get very concerned about, oh, you have lots of slides, that's gonna take too long. There is no number of slides that makes your presentation too long. It depends on how you use your slides. When your slides are very information dense, you've got a lot of stuff on there, people have to take a lot longer to read. So if you're doing anything while you're talking, they're not looking at you. It's also, people may give up. If it's too small, I've definitely sat in a presentation and gone, no, I'm not reading that. Because it's just too much stuff. You're probably not talking about all the stuff at once. You're talking about one idea and then moving to the next. And if you need to recap those ideas, you can absolutely have kind of a finished product summary slide. But if you would like to break it down, you can use animation or highlighting to say, okay, let's talk about just this one part and then the next part. Don't have a bunch of stuff on your slides because it causes cognitive overload, especially for a conference like today. You're listening to me right before lunch, and thank you, but you're probably hungry. You don't want me to throw a bunch of information at you. So yes, this will force you to put less stuff on your slides. In general, what you will see guidance say is about 6 objects on the slide is as much as you should put. Again, it's guidance. It's a general idea. If you have a good reason to deviate, then that's fine. Most people just slap stuff on a slide, and that's why they have too much stuff. If we're thoughtful about it, then 6 turns out to be about right. If you have more than that, you can always use more slides. Using more slides does not automatically make your presentation longer, depending on how you use the slides. You can also use, as I mentioned, animation or multiple slides to kind of highlight one idea at a time in the context of other ideas. Another thing that lots of people miss is we don't pay attention to color contrast. Some of this is PowerPoint or Google Slides, or your presentation tool of choice doesn't do a good job of encouraging you to use good color contrast. Some of this is we don't think about it very often because my eyesight's just fine. When people need to actually read your content, they need to see what's up there. There are standards, WCAG standards, that say that you should generally make your text to background 4.5 to 1. If you are doing graphical objects, not text, so if I have a graph, an image, we want to make our contrast 3 to 1. And there are free tools. Microsoft has one called Accessibility Insights that you can use to measure that contrast. So I'm going to show you some examples of different contrasts so that we can get used to it. My slides are a very, very light gray or off-white background. And that is an almost black font, a dark gray font. But what if we put it on a blue background? Does anybody think the blue background is easier to read? Raise your hand. It's okay if you do. I honestly want to know. I see no hands. That is pretty much what I'd expect. What I see most often at tech conferences is light gray text on a very light background. People with low vision, glaucoma, cataracts, people who are tired can't read your slide when you do this. There's also the opposite. We like our dark mode, so we put a dark slide background. If you're going to do that, and I'll talk about that a little more in a second, you need to have a light text. So that's a very low contrast combination there. Dark text on a light background works, light text on a dark background works. The maximum amount of contrast is black text on a white background. You generally will, even though I'm telling you you need good color contrast, we usually don't do pure black on pure white because that's also hard on the eyes. The white is very glaring. The dark is very bold. So we kind of go for something less than 21 and greater than 4.5 to 1. What you see on my slide has a contrast with the purple of 9.5 to 1. So that's acceptable. There is debate in the accessibility community about exactly how to measure color contrast. If you would like to nerd out on that with me, I would love to talk about it. For now, we're going to go with WCAG standards until a new standard is adopted. This is an imperfect science, just like most of everything about anatomy and psychology is. We learn as we go. That's how science works. So that's why I'm using the WCAG standards. When we change to another standard that is commonly accepted, then I'll change too. Diagrams have to have good color contrast, but when we do diagrams, there's actually more to measure. We have to measure the box to the light gray background, the text inside to the box, and the arrow to the background. Same thing with charts. Text to background for our legends and titles, bars to background, and the bars to each other if you're using them to convey some type of meaning. There are a lot of tools out there that can help with color contrast. These are, again, all in that handout, which is on my website, datasavvy.me. And some of them will help you plan a color palette in general and help you see all the combinations of your colors together, what they look like. Some of them, this is the tool I mentioned earlier, will help you measure after the fact to make sure your slides look okay. So I'm going to pull this one up real quick so we can see measuring color contrast. I think I told you the purple, and this is a free download from Microsoft, is 9.5 to 1. So there's my off-white, light gray, and there is my purple. This one says it's 8.4 on this laptop. That may or may not be exactly the same shade, but so that still gives me a very good contrast. This is how we measure it. If you pick colors in advance and you know what your background looks like, you know what your main font color looks like, and you know what maybe one other color you plan to use on the slide looks like, you're done. You don't have to keep measuring it. So if you get a good color palette, that's all there is. You don't have to think about it again. You can keep using it for later presentations. There's a couple other really good sites that I like. Adobe not only has a color contrast analyzer, but it also has a color blindness check. And Who Can Use is focused on fonts. And it will simulate different scenarios, like what does this look like for someone with glaucoma or cataracts, in addition to general low vision or color vision deficiency. The question that I get asked a lot is, can I use dark backgrounds? Can my slides basically be in dark mode? And here's what the research says as of now. If you have, quote, normal vision, light backgrounds are more effective for reading, hardcore reading like a book. Glanceable reading, meaning we glance up at slides but we're not focused on it all the time, is the same during the day, but a light background is easier to read when you're in the dark. If you have low vision due to cloudiness, you may prefer a dark background. People with astigmatism, like me, actually struggle a little bit with dark mode. So I tend to use light backgrounds on slides because that's also my preference. As I said earlier, you can't win. There is no single right answer. My advice would be pick your preference, but have really good color contrast. So in addition to color contrast in general for low vision, we need to think about color vision deficiency. We can use things other than color to convey meaning. I'm not going to stand up here and say, don't use color. My slides have color. I create data visualizations that use color. But what we want to do is use something alongside the color. We want to double encode things so that if somebody doesn't see the color, they still get the intended meaning. That could be symbols, text, or patterns. If we keep our colors minimal, you will see that I probably never have more than about 5 colors on my slide. It's usually 3. There's a background color, an accent color, and font. Keeping colors minimal reduces the chance that the color contrast will cause a problem for someone. We want to avoid problematic color combinations that we know are difficult, such as red and green, sometimes blue and purple. Brown and green also cause problems. There's about 12, 15 different combinations that are very difficult to distinguish for people who have color vision deficiency. So you won't see me have slides with red and green on them at the same time. That's not to say you can't use red or green, just that if you put them both on a slide together and someone needs to be able to tell them apart, you've now caused that person a lot of struggle and distraction. And the last thing I want to do while you're looking at my slides is to stress you out. I want you to be more focused on the presentation. The bad news is there are all kinds of color blindness, including a blue weak color blindness. So some people will say, well, just do all your slides in gray and blue then. There are people who can't distinguish blue. So this is just a reminder, do your best. You can't, it won't work for every single person on the earth, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to optimize for a large amount of people that consume information differently from ourselves. Again, there are lots of great tools for this. There is a color contrast checker that works pretty much like the one that I just showed you earlier, but has a color vision deficiency component. There's a simulator where you can take screenshots of your slides and then throw it in there and see what it looks in all the different types of color blindness. And then there's Adobe. I mentioned this one earlier because they have a color contrast tool that will tell you your color contrast between 2 colors is 4.5 to 1. But they also have a color palette planning tool in the same site where if you have white lines in your colors like you see on my slide there, it's telling you that those colors are not distinguishable enough. And so you can adjust your colors using a color wheel or by typing in hex values until you get 5 colors that are distinguishable. Yes, that was very obnoxious and done on purpose. You probably don't need transitions in your slide. They get distracting. Some of them are swans or whatever bird that was. I'm not going to say never use them. I'm going to say be purposeful. If you do it for a reason, not just to decorate your slides with transitions. Appear and disappear animations may be okay. I'm using appear animations because I want to focus on the one topic that I'm talking on in that slide and then move to the next. We do not need bouncing and swirling. Please don't. It can actually make people sick. Do you want to present something and make someone sick? Please don't. Again, if we use transitions and animations purposely, they focus attention on what we want people to be focused on. They're not just decoration. Some presentations have interactive materials. Those could be polls, quizzes, any kind of feedback mechanisms. We want to make sure all of that is accessible too. Does it have good color contrast? Is it keyboard and screen reader accessible? If somebody needs to go fill in your poll, can they do that if they don't use a mouse? Make sure it uses legible fonts. Some of them are customizable. You can change the font to help with this. The bigger thing is allow more time than you think you need to have that interaction. You know your poll questions. You've seen them, you wrote them probably. Other people are getting into a tool for the first time likely, reading the question for the first time and having to think and make up their mind for their answer. So if I think it would take me 5 seconds to answer, I need to allow a lot more time than that for sure. Handouts. You received a link to the handout at the beginning of my presentation. It is also available at datasavvy.me in the presentation section. It had all of the links and kind of a summary of what my slides say, because I want you to not have to be furiously taking notes or scribbling down or typing down a URL and worried that you missed it. So it's there for you. If you want to provide your slides as a handout, which is fairly common at tech conferences, make sure your slides are accessible. Do they have alt text and reading order for screen readers? There is a built-in accessibility checker in PowerPoint. Google Slides also has one. If you're converting to PDF, there are actually multiple standards for PDF, and one of them is more accessible than the default. So make sure you convert to accessible PDFs. But sometimes, like what I did today, a separate document is better. It's designed for you to take with you. My slides, they kind of make sense on their own, but a lot of people's slides don't. We may be telling a story, somebody's doing something different, and you're just getting cool pictures with a title on the slide. Do you really want those slides? I mean, maybe they're funny, but they're usually not very useful. So sometimes it's better to have a handout. If you're going to do that, make sure you use, if it's a Word document like mine, headings and alt text so that people who use screen readers can consume that handout as well. Word has an accessibility checker built in. If you use something else, see if your tool has an accessibility checker. If you can, make those available before the session so that people don't have to take as many notes. They're not worried about that part. They can go, oh, that's already in the handout. I'm just going to listen and focus now. All right, audience background. We're going to move from accessibility into something a little different. And it's really about having respect for your audience and their experiences. We want to understand, if possible, their existing knowledge. You can kind of assume a little bit of background at a tech conference. Sometimes I ask people, we want to at least explain, if not avoid, any jargon and acronyms. We work in tech. We're not going to completely avoid acronyms, but we do want to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. And we also want to make sure we use inclusive language. So when I say understanding and respecting your audience's knowledge, I mean that I don't want to talk way above someone's level of knowledge or way below. Have you ever gone to a talk that they said, oh, this is kind of like a 300 level-ish, and somebody was way up here and it was either way too easy or it was so deep that you really couldn't understand it and you probably zoned out a little bit? It wasn't that the speaker, wasn't good or didn't present good information. It's that it couldn't reach you based on your experiences. So when I start a tech talk, I usually ask, if I'm doing a Power BI session, I'll say, how many of you have made a Power BI report? And sometimes the room will have 50% of people who've never done that. So I may explain things a little differently throughout my presentation because of that. Sometimes you don't know and you just roll with it. But if you can, ask about it. If you're submitting to a conference, ask about it. If you're presenting at work and it's to another team, ask someone who knows, does this team have expertise in this area, or do I need to explain this more? As I said, you can ask when you start your talk and try to adjust on the fly. You can't adjust your slides, but you can adjust what you say. All right, my SQL people. Everybody know these acronyms off the top of your head really quickly? I could probably get them if I sat and stared at them for a long time. I never remember what NUMA stands for, non-uniform memory access, CCIs, cluster column store indexes. If you don't deal with these every day, you may have heard the acronym, but you might not know it off the top of your head. If I start talking about how great CCIs are in data warehouses and you don't know what a CCI is, you're going to be kind of frustrated with me if I'm still doing it 15 minutes into the talk. So the general helpful rule is you can say the acronym and explain what it is the first time you mention it. Make sure you explained it, and then you can refer to it again. So now that I've told you that CCIs are cluster column store indexes, we can go and I may say CCI, but I've told you that when I say CCI, you know that it means clustered column store index. The other way to make people feel more included is to actually use inclusive language. Instead of saying, hey guys, what if we said hello everyone or hi folks? I'm from Texas originally, so I get to say hi y'all. Some people's languages have a built-in thing for that. US English does not, so I get y'all. It is frustrating to many people when you go, oh, it's so easy, you just do this. It may be easy for you. It's not easy for everyone. I've been to a lot of presentations and been very intimidated. They're like, oh yeah, it's easy, just, I have no idea how to do that. That's not easy. So you've lost me. I'm not listening anymore because I don't know how to do the first thing you told me I should know how to do. So instead of that, what if you said, do this? If you're doing a demo, you do this, or notice that this happened, or that I did this. And then people won't feel intimidated. There's a lot of stuff everyone in this room has a different knowledge set. I want you all to learn from me, even if you've never presented before. So I'm not going to tell you that any of what I'm presenting is necessarily easy for everyone. Some of it's easy for me, but I've been doing it a while, so things that are easy for me now probably weren't easy for me 10 years ago. I don't want to turn people off in the middle of my presentation by using that language. It is very common in the US to be like, oh, I'm so OCD about this, or when you're having a day that's been an emotional roller coaster to go, oh, it was a bipolar day. But those have specific meanings. Those are conditions that people suffer through. So if you've now insulted someone while you are talking, they're likely now distracted thinking about this condition that they or their friend or family or someone has, and thinking this person really doesn't know what a struggle that was, instead of listening to whatever we're presenting about. And of course, check your privilege. Part of the it's easy thing is ableism. Also, you can't assume experiences. A lot of people say, oh, we go and submit at conferences. But if you go around and ask women, especially women of color, what it's like to be the token woman at a conference, Sequel Bits has been very good. It's not here. But there are often times where we had very different experiences from the average white male who's been in tech for 20 years. All right. If you've got your presentation design and you know how you're going to talk to your audience, let's talk about the environment in which you are presenting. So this will work for online or in person or hybrid. Is there a mic available for all speakers, and does it work? I'm using real-time captions that are built into Windows 11. PowerPoint also has real-time captions. I believe the app we're using for this conference, if you watch it online, it also has captions. But if I just used that, you would not have the captions. And I didn't think that's fair. If you're tired, if you don't speak English natively, I want you to be able to see at least a close approximation of the words as I'm saying them. So I ask up front, what's our captioning solution? Sometimes the answer is nothing. There are wonderful paid products and people that you can have real-time captioning. It's expensive, to be honest, so I'm settling for what's in Windows 11 because it works for me right now. If I get rich and keep presenting, I'll pay someone to real-time caption for me. I have presented with a sign language interpreter, which I thought was really, really cool. I did an all-day workshop in Austin, and the sign language interpreter stood off from the side, and any tech term that didn't have a sign, they would just spell it out, which is another reason that if I speak out my acronyms and explain them the first time, my sign language interpreter could then go on and come up either with an acronym spelling or a sign for that. Is there good lighting? I have definitely been, this is not the case. I am in a corner, but I have decent lighting. I have been shoved in a dark corner while speaking just because the room setup was a little awkward. It's hard to be a conference organizer. I've been one, so this is not necessarily dogging on them, but to keep this fresh in your mind that, maybe we can make adjustments. If you are the conference organizer or you're the speaker and you want to feel a little empowered to ask, you can tell them, hey, I went to this presentation and Megan said it's not good if you can't see your speaker, so can we move the desk over a little bit or something? And then if anybody has accessibility needs, and this is especially more appropriate if you have a full day workshop or a multi-day training session, you can ask people, email whatever contact if you have a special need that I can accommodate beforehand so that I can change the way that I talk or the slides or something to better accommodate you. If you're in person, we need to consider if the location that we are speaking at is accessible. Both can our speakers and audiences get to the room, and can they get on the stage? This is a fairly, not gigantic step, but I've definitely spoken at conferences where the actual stage was about this high, and there was like a step, and sometimes the step was broken. So if you're someone with a knee injury, the first thing you have to do right before speaking is to crawl up on the stage or get someone to help you, and now you're flustered, and that's not a great way to start a presentation. So if you're planning a conference, be aware of that. This is a low step, it's fine. Someone could have helped me if I had a knee issue. I'm talking much bigger than this. But in general, is your stage and presentation area accessible? Is there good lighting for speakers and interpreters if you have them? And for online conferences, do you have a quiet place to present? If you are presenting from your home, we just went through a pandemic. We all probably presented from our homes or went to a meeting from home for a little bit. Can you find a quiet place? If your kids are home and playing in the background, it may be hard for other people to hear. I have a hard time tuning out background noise a little bit. And so if there's something else going on, which this room isn't perfect either, but we have to be aware that I probably can't speak quietly because there's ambient noise. So how can we do our best to make sure that people listening feel like it was worthwhile to attend by making sure that I sound clear? Background environments, not just noise, but people. Are there people, if you're presenting with a camera on, are there people walking behind you constantly? Is your dog playing fetch in the background? It's probably pretty cute, but not for 50 minutes straight. My dog shows up in my user group presentations sometimes. It's not a huge deal. People like my dog. But if she's constantly bumping into things or kids are knocking something over, running around in the background, people aren't paying attention to me. They're paying attention to the dog. I don't blame them, but I know you're not listening to my content. Steady internet connections. If you can plug in and not be on Wi-Fi while presenting, that's probably best. If you can't, just try to find the best place in your location where you know the internet is good. So we're coming towards the end. What I hope you got out of this is that we want to focus on what we want our audience to learn or take away from our presentations instead of focusing on us, what we're going to say. It honestly takes a little bit of the pressure off of me, but it also hopefully results in a better experience for you as well. I don't have extraneous slides or too many tangents that I go on because I'm focused on what I want you to get out of this. We want to use large, legible fonts. Right now, the guidance is sans serif. You want to have at least 24-point fonts in your body text of your slides. We want to check our color contrasts. And I mentioned, if you do it first, you plan your color palette, you can kind of check everything once, and then you don't have to check it anymore because you're confident you've already checked it. Make sure your handouts are accessible, whether that's your slides or a separate document or code, just make sure that someone who uses a screen reader or doesn't use a mouse, or if it's slides and you've set the colors, if they can't read it because they are low vision, that they can change the background color, set all that so it's optimal for more people than just you. And then we want to respect our audience's experiences. So that may be level of knowledge, it may be demographic background or disabilities, it may be gender. Be aware that you may be excluding people by using language like, hey guys, it's easy. We don't have to do that. It's not required to make our points. If you can ask beforehand, before you present, so you're at least aware of the presentation environment, that's pretty helpful so that you can make adjustments or ask your conference or user group or whatever organizer for adjustments if possible. For SQL Bits, we had a speaker meeting beforehand so that I could ask these questions and figure out what I wanted to do. Again, if you'd like the handout, it is at tinyurl.com/presentforhumans. And I hope you took something away from this that will help you present more inclusively in the future. Thank you.